Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the Boiling Frogs Post Roundtable. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you on the 4th of November 2015, and today we are joined once again by BoilingFrogsPost.com founder and editor Sibel Edmonds, as well as veteran radio broadcaster and independent podcaster Peter B. Collins of PeterBCollins.com. And today we're going to be continuing a conversation that we began in the previous edition of this Roundtable series, so I will commend that video to your attention, or that audio to your attention, if you haven't listened to it or viewed it yourself so far. Or if you want to refamiliarize yourself with that conversation, talking about the real Dennis Hastert scandal. And I emphasize real because people who have been following the mainstream version of this scandal will probably be confused about what this story is even about. There's something about structured bank withdrawals that Hastert, the former U.S. Speaker of the House, was making to get blackmail money to pay off someone who was blackmailing him about some sort of impropriety that took place decades ago, and the suggestion is that it was some sort of sexual abuse of a minor when he was a wrestling coach in Yorkville back in the 1960s. A very strange case that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense until you learn the real story, which has been handily compiled for you in a post on BoilingFrogsPost.com called The People's Campaign, The Real Hastert Case, all in one place, that has a collection of all of the audio podcasts, the articles, and the videos that we've been doing at BoilingFrogsPost.com to expose the real story, not just of some impropriety that took place 3 or 4 decades ago, but the ongoing improprieties that have taken place in the intervening decades involving people like Hastert and others, Congress members who have been involved in child rape, as well as blackmail, money laundering, drug running, and a host of other illicit activities. The scandal is much, much deeper than the mainstream will ever let on, as people who have been following this coverage know. That is what we were talking about in the previous roundtable discussion, but there has been an update to this story for those who've been paying attention. We'll take this from USA Today, October 28th, 2015. Ex-Speaker Dennis Hastert pleads guilty in hush money case. Quote, former U.S. House Speaker Dennis Hastert pleaded guilty Wednesday to making dozens of illegally structured bank withdrawals as part of an effort to pay hush money to someone from his past for decades-old misconduct. Hastert pleaded guilty to one count in the indictment, which carries a maximum sentence of 5 years. Under the plea agreement, federal prosecutor Stephen Block recommended that Hastert, the longest-serving GOP speaker in history, be sentenced to 0 to 6 months in federal prison. Emphasis on 0. A judge will make the final decision on the terms of the sentence and may reject the prosecutor's recommendation. Sentencing is scheduled for February 29th. With the guilty plea, Hastert, 73, may be able to keep further embarrassing details about why he agreed to pay $3.5 million to an unidentified individual from Yorkville, Illinois, out of the public eye. End quote. And of course, that is about as far as any of the coverage will go, talking about this plea deal and what is at stake here. Sibel, Peter, let's bring you into this conversation. First, Sibel, anything at all surprising about this plea deal that you predicted would happen?
Of course not. As we have stated publicly, as I went on record 2 months ago and predicted that this was going to happen. And I'm glad you emphasized 0, because that's where the emphasis is with this plea bargaining. And for people who have been following our coverage, they are not surprised. But the conclusion, I believe, is much more severe and significant than most people believe. The message it sends is you can be a pedophile, rapist. If you want immunity, if you want to be protected, run for office, become a U.S. representative. Also, there is a great parallel here. We always hear about media people covering this children raping Taliban officials in Afghanistan. And I know it's going to sound preposterous to some people, but how different is our Taliban here? You know, these are our government representatives, and including our so-called Department of Justice. This is what they do. They engage in child rape, pedophilia. They are thieves, and they get away with it. They have full immunity. So we are looking at a case of U.S. Taliban, basically, in United States Congress.
Peter, any thoughts?
I would add that the hope of Hastert and the government prosecutors is that this will completely put a lid or seal the cover-up in place over former Speaker Hastert's deep corruption and personal misdeeds. And I just want to take a moment here to thank Sibel Edmonds for the courageous exposure that she has offered based on her knowledge and what she has dug up as a good journalist. And she has created an entire package that is almost like an IKEA piece of furniture. And so if there are any journalists or people who work in the corporate media who view this discussion podcast, I encourage you to go to Boiling Frog's post and click on the package that is called where do I have it here? I had it up. The Real Hastert Case, all in one place. And there, with just a little bit of assembly on your part, you could construct one of the biggest exposés in recent American history and shame the leading elements of our corporate media and, as Sibel likes to call it, the pseudo-independent media, who have just been very happy to scratch the surface on this case and leave it at that. And it begs a lot of questions that we're going to try to deal with today about why the American people are so passive, why they're so willing to accept this very sloppy investigation, the sloppy reporting of it, and what is clearly a very well-executed cover-up of misdeeds that start with campaign finance and go all the way to personal corruption of a sexual nature. And in between, the national security of the United States is put at risk, and the ability to blackmail leaders like Dennis Hastert, both during and after he left office, is another vulnerability that should bring out the chops of any good reporter. But as we have discussed, there is precious little, curiosity even on the part of major media outlets about the true depth of the Hastert story.
Well, congratulations, Peter. Not only have I never in my life imagined that Boiling Frog's post reporting would be compared to IKEA furniture, but I am also surprised that that analogy actually makes sense to me and does not offend my sensibilities. So that is quite a feat. Well, yes, I agree wholeheartedly that that Sibel needs to be commended for her part in bringing this information to all of us, and for the cookie crumb trail that she's left there for any enterprising would-be reporter who apparently does not exist. All right, let's move on to the next part of this conversation, because as Peter brought up there last time, of course, we were talking less so about at the end of the conversation, we were talking less so about the Hastert and what was or was not happening in the courtroom with him, which again was a foregone conclusion, because let's remember he was not on trial for child rape or anything of that sort. He was on trial for restructuring withdrawals from his bank account, so make of that what you will. But the ultimate point of this is, well, why hasn't the public reacted to this? Why haven't they cared about the sloppy reporting and the other things that Peter was mentioning there? And I think that the conclusion of this will tell us a lot about where we need to go in the future on this topic. So let's go back to Sibel. At the end of the last conversation on this topic, we were talking about alternative visions for what the way the public is receiving and processing this information, and I mentioned that you had talked about the prospect of moral decay as one way of describing what the public is going through. Perhaps you can flesh out a little bit more what that means and how you see that playing out right now in this the response to this case.
Sure. You brought up several good points during our last discussion, and you mentioned some really important and applicable keywords. One of them is desensitization, and that we have been seeing a lot, and I don't think anybody with any sense of logic would disagree or could disagree with that. We have that element on the ground, and it's at work, and we see it clearly. Same thing with the notion of helplessness. When people are within the same rut for so long, and they start viewing themselves as helpless. What can I do? I'm so little. It's there is nothing I can do. And in fact, repeating it to themselves so often and so frequently, that becomes the reality, or at least their reality. But I believe, in addition to these two elements, because as I said, nobody would argue against those two notions you brought up, both of them are affecting the people and what we see on the ground with people. We also have to see that even though those elements are at work, it's not everything. People still consciously make decisions, and people engage in calculations. I mean, we do it in our daily lives from the time we wake up in the morning until we fall asleep. This whole notion that we learned during econ classes, opportunity cost, it's like, okay, I can do this or I can do that. This will bring, for example, instant gratification. This other one is a little bit harder, and it may take me longer to get some satisfaction out of it, and possibly I may get no satisfaction out of it. I'm talking about these types of calculations that people engage, whether they are doing it consciously or subconsciously, all the time. And when you look at people engaging in these conscious decision making based on materialism, based on instant gratification, based on laziness, what is a little bit more difficult, what is easier. When you start adding those and you see actually people, even those, let's say, presented with the realities, with the facts, with data, with information, still making a decision that, no, I do not want to continue looking at it. I don't want to do something about it. And I believe and I view that we see much of this mechanism in place. That is what I call as moral decay. And as I said, there are various reasons for it. The consumerism, the materialism, you're looking at the instant gratification. Well, what would you call this whole dependency and seeking instant gratification? There is give or take. You're looking at all these people. I'm not saying everyone. And that's a good point. I just want to pause here. We got many viewers from your website and our website, collective websites, saying, I am not one of those people and I care. We know. In fact, most of the things that we are putting forth here is not about you, the viewers who are tuning in at, Corbett Reports or Boiling Frogs posts. You're supporting your activists to a certain degree. So please don't take that. How come you're accusing me? We are talking about the majority, and even you, the viewers, would accept the fact that the majority are in this boat. So you are among our us, the irate minority. So that's what I mean by moral decay. People saying, oh, the other day I was looking at the statistics. U.S. has the highest rate of sexually transmitted diseases, et cetera, But then you're also looking at people like, I want to go to the bar, I want to get lucky, I want to get laid. Well, these things go together. I just mentioned opportunity cost. Good things never come fast and easy, or rarely come fast and easy. So when you're looking at society that is putting aside many traditional, whether they stem from cultural or their religion or their own set of personal principles and values, and go with this trend, then that's what I call the decay, the moral decay. That's what we see. And whether it's on Hastert issue or other issues we are covering, that element is also at work, and is at work really heavily. That was what I meant.
Well, I would offer a couple of things. One is that for decades, the media and various communications outlets have been going lower and lower to reach what was called the lowest common denominator. And I think that in many respects, the American public has accommodated that and moved into a a lower form of intellectual behavior. And this is not reflecting IQs or socialization or class, but people are so willing to be anesthetized by what is on television. And, recently I took a 3-week trip to Spain. And it was really interesting because in Madrid, in Barcelona, and in many of the smaller towns that we visited, people are not sitting at home in the evening watching a flat screen TV. They get out, walk around town, say hi to their friends, go to the bar and have a drink and some tapas. And it's not that they can't be, treated like sheep or misled. My point is that their culture is much less insular than ours. And so the rewards in the U.S. are you work hard, you go home and move into some form of isolated splendor, whatever level of splendor you can afford, and then you zone out. And whether you're using alcohol or prescription drugs or, recreational marijuana is now available in 4 states, the whole impetus is to check out, not to take responsibility, not to get involved, not to challenge yourself intellectually, not to challenge yourself politically. And so we've reached the point where we openly pander to the lowest common denominator, and it creates it enables the process of manipulation. And so I don't view the American people simply as victims of this manipulation. They have acceded to it. They may not have, in your terminology, Sibel, made that opportunity cost decision of, am I going to read Boiling Frog's post today, or am I going to go to the Huffington Post and get my celebrity fix? But many people consciously make that choice, and they are easily led into the comfort of celebrity bullshit, as opposed to the challenge of the calamities that are occurring around us, and we watch and profit from them, but we don't really get actively involved.
Well, that's interesting. I think it's interesting that in a way that seems to suggest that we can compartmentalize people based on their media consumption choices, which I think is true. I think there is obviously a reflection between the media people choose to consume and the type of person they are or end up becoming as a result of that. But that, I think, speaks volumes to what perhaps the deeper root of this problem is, which is why I think I bray at the idea of moral decay as if there's been some sort of shift in the general moral compass of the general population. I would frame it more as it's a somewhat esoteric point, but I think, let's put it this way, if you put someone in a room where Dennis Hastert or anyone else was raping a child, I don't think many people would hesitate about what to do there. They would react physically and violently, and justifiably so in a situation like that. I mean, it obviously would be incensing. But we are now in a almost completely mediated society where almost all of the information we receive about the outside world is coming through media of different sorts. And so whether you go to the Huffington Post or you go to Boiling Frog's Post or you go to whatever, site or television channel or what have you for your news information, that is going to greatly influence your view of the world, what is happening in the world, who you are in that, how you identify yourself within that. So it's in that context that I think we can situate the change that is taking place in people's ability to act or interact or react to these types of problems. And I think the polarization of the media, specifically in recent years, recent decades at any rate, is very much plays into that, especially, for example, in the mainstream U.S. Television network context, where people are now constantly driven by outrage over, can you believe this Democrat said this? Can you believe this Republican said this? And it's always trying to pit people at each other. So I think people's outrage button has been pushed so many millions and millions of times over the past several years that it does start to wear out after a while. That's the type of desensitization I mean. But obviously, again, that doesn't apply, I think, to people who are tuning out of that corporate media matrix to get into the alternative media, because they've already made the decision that particular type of outrage machine is not what they're looking for. There's a lot to say there, but let's not talk about this amongst only ourselves. Of course, as you mentioned, Sibel, there have been hundreds of comments, replies, emails, all sorts of different feedback that we've been getting. So let's bring some of the viewers into this. And in my recent Questions for Corbett podcast series, I highlighted a couple of the responses that I've received so far, including one talking about the environmental effects of things that can influence our reaction to these types of things. As you were talking about, Peter, we're talking about recreational drugs or prescription drugs or whatever, alcohol that people turn to try to desensitize themselves to this type of information. And people were talking about some of the other environmental toxins that have been creeping into our environment more and more lately as potential ways that we could be being subdued without our knowledge. We also had a comment that I highlighted again with someone expressing frustration. Well, what are we supposed to do about this? Yes, we are outraged. What do we do about this? Which seemed to be an overall theme that was repeated among many listeners and respondents. Let's just go through a couple from my own website. There was user Gary Edgeberg who wrote, "When there are so many atrocities going on in the world, why should people get more upset and outraged about political pedophile rings than, say, child sex trafficking and human trafficking in general, which affects tens of thousands more victims, or organ harvesting, or hegemony-driven wars that kill and maim and destroy the daily lives of millions, or GMOs and the consequent suicides of thousands of farmers in India, or geoengineering, or social engineering that is both gross and subtle yet pervasive and human spirit eroding, or any number of false flags, or the horrible condition that 2 billion or so people on this planet face on a daily basis, or Fukushima, or how women are mistreated around the world, or. If we are going to get outraged and show that we care, where do we start, and where does outrage and our ability to care end? Furthermore, what exactly do we do with our outrage, and how exactly do we care? Who measures our outrage and caring responses and deems them adequate or inadequate?" Interesting points there. User Graviv writes, "I think people try to live normal lives, being engaged and informed, civic-minded, but get preoccupied, maybe not with celebrity lives so much, but with staying well without health insurance, having less and less money. People may be hunkering down in their own circles of family and friends for security and to avoid the horrors that are very difficult for childlike, fun-minded society to process. There are some urgent things getting thrown at people in this country." Sibel, an email that you forwarded to me that was addressed to all of us in the roundtable. Briefly, in my opinion, there are probably at least 3 categories, not just 2, as James described. The irate, or more informed minority that wants to do something and, like Sibel, have in the past tried various routes and found them mainly unsuccessful. Then the largest majority that are mostly clueless and are more concerned with Dancing with the Stars and the Game of Thrones. But then you have the fairly to very politically active that simply will not stray too far from the MSM, Republican Democrat leadership, or the respectable education informing their opinions. Those are informed voters that have fact-filled debate about Benghazi and how Clinton cleared her emails, but won't consider seriously Mena, Arkansas, or Vince Foster, etc. Or on the other side, people who will complain about Bush being a war criminal, but won't consider 9/11 being an inside job, or even that the hijackers were trained and allowed into the country. They'll hear or read stories like Hastert and glimpse the larger implications, but won't allow themselves to address it head-on for various reasons. It ruins the educational and left-right paradigm that's foundational to their worldview. In my opinion, it's like they just want to hope that Hastert is simply a really bad apple. Okay, lots of different takes from different perspectives. Sibel, Peter, your perspective on this.
Well, with the first comment that you were reading, and that was someone saying, well, does it have to be either or? That's one question I posed to that commenter. And also the other thing is for us to start viewing these as separate deals rather than seeing the major connections and the common denominators among them. Everything, or almost everything, I couldn't keep track of all the examples this viewer gave. If you really step back, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 steps, take maybe 15, 20 steps back, then you look at and you start seeing look at it and you'll start seeing the pattern emerging. Okay, so that's, and when you look at that pattern, you see they are not different cases caused by different causes. Many of them are the result of the same macro 2-3 causes that we have been covering, we have been talking about it. And as far as the other comment goes, which I found it really profound, the one that was addressed to all 3-4 of us, it's true because it confirms what I was just saying, that they do make this conscious decision to a certain degree of looking the other way. They consciously don't want their paradigm shift or be challenged. And I want to emphasize the word conscious. And Peter brought up so many great points. And I'm thinking, here we go. I can spend half an hour, 45 minutes on really great points Peter B just made. And from culture to what you saw, Peter, because I come from a different culture. I have been here for 28 years, and I can tell you, I haven't been adjusted at all to what you described, because I grew up and I had that. And I spent 2.5 months last summer. I was in the midst of it in Middle Eastern countries, in European countries. They are not drugging their kids. They are not taking antidepressants. They are not in front of TV. Relatively speaking, compared to the American population, and the socialization, they make eye contact. We sit down, we have teas, and we talk for hours. Everybody's out there seeking human contact, and so there are so many jewels in there that you mentioned. And I was going, I was nodding and going like this. But the other important thing that I believe we need to emphasize has to do with, well, I know, James, you have been emphasizing a lot of things. There are changes that needs to be made within individuals. Instead of saying, well, how am I going to get 5 million people to say, how am I going to do with me, maybe my immediate family? That's extremely important. That's the starting point. But the second thing is also there are things that need to be done in a more collective manner. Now, the danger of that becoming the group think, when you start suddenly becoming another party, another bureaucracy and leadership, and to be able to get out of it. But one of the things that I think is related to what Peter mentioned, that I believe it affects the culture here, and that started long before 9/11, long before 70s or 80s. I mean, you're looking at so many elements leading these, urbanization, the industrial era. When you started looking at this mega cities formation, and people going from extended families, agrarian societies, into nuclear family, and now they are pouring into nuclear family. Even that is being dissolved. They want people to remain these isolated individuals. You know how much emotional support people drive in cultures like where I came from and where I go and visit. Just being with this network of extended family members, and the function that in the past grandmothers served by giving some, I'm not going to say dictate or advise or lecturing, but talking from experience, things that may look huge to us at the age 24, 25 during the first year of marriage. We want to know that it's normal. Well, that function today is being served by all these psychoanalysts and the psychologists, and then together supplemented by all the pills that are going. All those roles were dissolved and narrowed down into what we are seeing today. So that again went through this time span. And as far as some of the possible solutions, reaching these people, informing, that's where I am right now. And that is, for example, with this Hastert campaign, we saw, yes, we have some supporters. We have this reach of, let's say, 20,000 or 40,000 or say 50,000 between your viewers and Boiling Frogs posts and a couple of other networks and supporters. Okay, 50,000. And there are still millions and millions who say, I don't know about this. I couldn't find out about BFB or Corbett Report. No, I didn't know. How do we get the message or messages expand and reach more people? That is the question, and that's where I am today. Peter?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things. One is that I believe Americans have kind of maxed out on compassion and on their ability to absorb outrage. And we have so much contrived outrage. And you and James alluded to that earlier, but I can't tell you how many homes of people who don't identify as conservative or Republican, where you enter and Fox News is on a TV, either in the kitchen or in the living room, constantly. And you know, people, it is a kind of addictive thing, and people get hooked on breaking news, and Donald Trump attacked Ben Carson, and Ben Carson didn't attack back, and so I think that people have become, that there is a certain element of people who are just fed up, and they've stopped paying attention except to sports or specific things that they think affect them or their families. And there are also many people who appear to be able to detach quite a bit and absorb a lot of what, you know, passes through their media channels, whatever they happen to be, without really reacting or being affected by them. And they have a kind of head down, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to pick up my check, I'm going to take care of my immediate family, and you know, I'm not going to make any waves or ask too many questions. And that's a very Soviet-style attitude that has really been effectively spread across much of our population. And I think we could, let's just quickly eliminate a couple of things. You know, often people will say, well, it's the fault of our elected leaders, or they say it's the fault of the media. Well, yeah, but it's my fault. It's our fault. Because we know our government has tortured. We know that the drones kill people wantonly and are not precision devices. We know about all of the trampling of human rights and constitutional rights that have occurred just in our recent history. But people appear to be willing to accept the new normal as long as they can make their car payments and watch the big game and be considered cool when they, you know, show up at a little party somewhere. So I think we have to, at least for the purposes of this discussion, or at least for this moment, discard all the excuses and all of the finger pointing, you know, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's their fault, because we really have the ability to access the information, and we still have enough constitutional rights to form groups and meet publicly and advocate for our standards and points of view and policies. But more or less, we don't. And people seem content to let, you know, big money drive the political process, let the media exclude voices. I mean, just one example, there's all this wrangling over the Republican debates and what CNBC did with their gotcha questions. Well, Fox set the standard for that, and CNBC was just trying to catch up. But the other side of that is that the networks have excluded Lawrence Lessig, who met the criteria to be included in the Democratic debate. He had more money than Lincoln Chafee. He was showing up in the polls, you know, parallel to Martin O'Malley and ahead of Lincoln Chafee. But the networks chose not to invite him because he had a single issue message about corruption in our government. And, you know, people are aware that he was excluded, but we didn't hear a rallying cry of people saying, you know, damn it, he's got something to say, we deserve to hear it, open up the debates. People just turn on the TV and they accept what is there. So my comment at the moment here is that people should look in the mirror and say, what more could I be doing? How could I, you know, make different choices to be more aware of what's going on and find ways to do something about it?
All right, a lot of good points there. I'll make one using a comment from my website from user Al Saleh, who I like this point. He says, forget the general public and their random motives. Focus on your circle of influence. That advice resonates with me because it is something that I think I very much agree with, which is the idea that, yes, I mean, obviously we're trying to reach out to the general public. Obviously we want this information to go mega viral and for millions upon millions upon millions of people to be talking about this at the dinner table. And hopefully, with the information we put out there, hopefully it will get out there. But that can't be our only goal. We can't just rely on this, everyone else is suddenly going to become switched on to this. There has to be something that we can actually do about this, that we can start implementing. That really resonates with me. But let's heat things up. This is a round table. We're going to hash things out and debate. Peter, it sounds to me like you're saying that one of the answers, or an answer or an outlet for this, is going to come through the political process. And if only Lawrence Lessig could get into the debates, we could get a serious debate about this. I fundamentally reject the notion that there is going to be a political answer to these problems. I just don't see it. I obviously am a voluntarist and a flavor of anarchist. I do not think that there's going to be a political process that is going to solve this problem. Let's expand on that point. I think we have to start talking about what it is that we see as the solution, and I do not see politics as the solution to this.
Okay, I'll go. All right. Well, here it is. I find myself torn between several principles that I agree with on both sides. Okay, and the reason I do not subscribe to this complete anarchism notion, from my point of view, and why I haven't subscribed to it, is because for me, it starts with this view or principle or the belief we have on human nature, okay? What people are like. Now, let me put it this way. If majority of people, 99%, or all people, or a big chunk of people, where let's say you and Peter and Guillermo, I could really see such notion taking effect, okay? But knowing the reality, there are things like, like notion of greed, okay? Different types of drives, self-centeredness, and all these other notions you bring that governs many people. I still believe, maybe that's a cynical point of view, as majority of the people, I do not and cannot view myself in the midst of those people without, and I tell you, the system you're talking about, I don't want to work within this system because everything is broken. So whatever you try to build in something that is so rotten and corrupt, I'm talking about foundation, it's going to collapse. Doesn't matter how great the person is. Although I believe that opportunity should have been provided to that person, and not that person was going to solve anything, but that was that exemplified that. But my example for people analogy is, think about this foundation that is rotting. It has termites in it, and there is this land movement under it, what you call it, the landslide, and totally rotted, right? It's about to just, it's terrible. And you bring in these people who are trying to decide to put a different awning on it and a nice shutters and a beautiful curtains. They are trying to decorate, and put things like, oh, if we can make the chimney this style when the foundation is rotten. So a lot of things have to be done in foundation level. Now, with the anarchy notion, I just give you an example of my own parents, okay? I had a father who spent most of his life with activism, as a doctor, as a surgeon. He spent a big portion of his time helping people without receiving money. And then I had a mother who fought that and doing those things every single day of her life. For her, it was stupid because at the time, let's say in Iran, we had a lot, okay? My dad, he was a very well-known surgeon. We had tons of money that was coming from he as a surgeon. So for my father was like, what more do you want? You have those security, the house, this and this, and I'm doing this portion for people. For my mother was, I want more. I mean, it's not enough. I want even more. And I think a lot of people fall into that category. This exemplifies different kinds of people. And we can get into the discussion of why people are that way, why we have bullies, why we have greed, why we have violent people, and then talk about nature, nurture, and everything. But the fact of it is nobody has been able to come into agreement. How much of it is nature? How much of it nurture? How much of it is our education system? But it is the way it is. Now, considering that this is the reality, I don't see myself being in that. But and I have to also admit, I have to do much more studying of anarchism. I don't see myself in there. The closest thing that I have seen, and I know some people are going to boo me here, is the original principles. Not perfect, okay? We did have people who were slave owners and all that, but this we are talking about 300 years ago. The closest thing that came in terms of principles, notions, was, as Peter said, our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and this separation. The federal government was supposed to be less than 1% once it was established. It was supposed to be local. It was supposed to be communities, okay? And so to me, that is as close as I have seen to, compared to everywhere else I have lived, everything else I have studied as to that. So that's my beef with anarchism. But on the other hand, I completely agree that trying to fix these little holes in there in a system that is completely rotten, from its election process, fundraising, the campaign funding, all the way to how everything currently works, it would be a futile attempt. That's why I have problem with people who are coming and saying, I have a petition for Congress, sign it. It's like, please, I'm not going to legitimize the illegitimate system, because once I sign that petition for whoever is a congressman who was elected by money from those people, I'm legitimizing the system. Or going out voting for these corrupt people, voting is legitimizing the illegitimate. Okay, so I'm not participating. I believe overhauling the system completely, but I don't fall into the anarchism ideology either. I still believe I would, if people were to come and tell me that we are going to have several billions, James Corbett, sign me up. I would. I would. But I see the reality of people, and I see what people are capable of. I see this no matter where it is, it happens. Big fish, little fish, big fish coming together collectively, going after the little fish. You have to really have this overly optimistic, which is not a bad thing, view of human nature and how people act in different situations. And I know you have had some great programs, and I watch every single one of them, James. Like this thing with traffic light, that was a great example. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that really worked beautifully there. But I promise you, you would do that in Tehran or in Istanbul, you're going to have tens of thousands of deaths there, and people are going to say that's assumption. But we already have, despite some of these things, but it's going to be even more because of, there are differences. There are differences culturally, environmentally, and everything. And the counter argument for that would be maybe those so-called civilized cultures had those rules and everything for so long that after you remove that, everybody still acted politely and considerate, and it worked out good. So I'm not saying that that's an answer. I'm saying that may be a possible answer, that living under all these everything by rule, like British society were for all those years, they act differently than, let's say, you go to Saigon or to Istanbul or go to Cairo and see how people would react and what will be the outcome. Peter?
Well, there's quite a bit here. Let me start by acknowledging, James, that I am captive to a system that is clearly broken. And anarchism, I don't consider myself an expert, but I've interviewed a number of people who I think are smart and excellent critical thinkers. The problem for me is that if you blow up a system instead of trying to fix it, my guess is that even more repressive elements will probably take control. And so it's difficult. There are no easy answers, and I will concede that I voted today. We had local elections, and I know the people who are running for my town council and the issues, and I feel good about that level of participation. Also, I worked on a political campaign for the progressive sheriff of San Francisco, who is being run out of town by a political machine that is captive to the tech lords of Silicon Valley. So I do still participate in what passes for a democratic system here in the United States. And I do it with a healthy dose of cynicism and a sense of realism that there are limits to what it can achieve and how much the real corruption and the other viruses can be corrected or limited or even defeated. So it then comes down to, well, how do we organize societies and how do we organize economies? And, you know, I feel that my orientation is to always push for a greater sense of fairness, knowing that we'll never achieve real fairness, and to push for justice, knowing that the systems are loaded and that we will never be able to achieve justice in every case that comes before us. And so, without trying to make excuses, I do feel that we do all run into the limits of what an individual human can do, and then it becomes what we do with our imaginations, to try to connect with other like-minded people and see if there is a way to build coalitions, to build potent community organizations and people who are committed to a specific set of issues. And that works up to the point that you collide with the political system that's dominated by money and brutal elements of both corporate and military power. And at the end of all this, which may sound a little convoluted, I'm not willing to give up. And so every day I make my opportunity choices to say, okay, what am I aware of that I can communicate to other people that might change how they decide to spend their time and use their power? And it's far from perfect, but it's the best I've been able to come up with in terms of finding meaning in my own life and attempting to spread my values and views to other people.
All right. Well, I think there's actually a lot of agreement between all of us on some certain basic points. I completely 100% agree that we are not going to reach utopia nirvana, and we're never going to have, that perfect place. So anything that demands that as the end result of whatever we're working at is doomed to failure. So I think, yes, incremental change and incremental improvement is what we have to work towards in whatever way we see fit to do that. And Sibel, I completely agree with you about human nature. Unfortunately, there are not several billion James Corbett's on this planet. Oh, if only. But no, I completely agree. There are repressive, nasty, violent, terrible people out there. There always will be, 100%, which is why I think we should not institute monopolies of violence called governments populated by those nasty, repressive, violent people in the hopes of saving us from nasty, repressive, violent people. It is doomed, I think, to the exact type of way that we've seen that wonderful idea of, the limited government and just a small little thing, and it'll only do this and it'll only protect our rights, becoming the most sprawling, corrupt, disgusting empire in the history of human civilization. I think that's not by accident. I think that's the way these systems inevitably devolve. But anyway, I think 3 bloggers talking about what political system, grand system we should have is like theologians arguing about how many angels are going to dance on the head of a pin. It amounts to nothing, really, in the real practical, real everyday world. So let's bring it back down to brass tacks. What are we actually going to do about this? What are we proposing specifically?
I have been teased that both James and Sibel have some interesting ideas that they have not yet shared with me, that they are about to spring on all of us. So go ahead.
Well, we're going to have James start because he's in this unfair advantage that he has, I ended up sharing what I was thinking or what I am planning or I'm looking into with James, and he hasn't had an opportunity to share his with me. So I'm going to be hearing it for the first time, Peter. And so let's start with James and have him put his idea forward of what his vision for the next move forward for the media, that's what we have been doing, all of us. And then after James, I'll go.
All right.
Fair enough. That is fair. You put me at a disadvantage because I formulated my idea in sort of response to yours, so now I have to figure how to introduce it without talking about your idea. All right, well, my idea goes back to something that I was talking about at the beginning of the year, the idea of implementing solutions in the real world that we can manifest in our own lives. This is something that I always talk about because I think this is ultimately what matters. And again, I think we have to keep focused on trying to spread this information and change consciousness and things of that nature. But I think we are more likely to do that by leading by some sort of example. And the example may be small, but the example makes a difference, especially when it is in a visible format. I think people will respond to the example more so than they will respond to people saying, look, this guy's a child rapist. What are you going to do about it? I don't think that's something, that's not a message that's going to resonate with most people. So the question then is, what example do you lead by? What do you actually do? And I think there is clearly, I think if the response to what we've done so far has shown anything, there clearly is a community of people out there who are watching these reports, who are incensed by this, who do feel frustrated like we do, who want to do something. So how do we harness that, and what do we do with that energy? And I think there must be a way that we can take that energy and direct it at actually helping real people in the real world. By, for example, I guess there's two ways you can go with this. One would be to say, okay, we're all outraged and we all hate what's going on, so let's form a vigilante committee with pitchforks and go after Dennis Hastert personally, vigilante justice or something. I don't think that's going to be a solution for a number of reasons, but mostly because, obviously, the state isn't going to appreciate that or allow that to take place, amongst other reasons. But the question then is, how do we actually help the people who have been directly actually affected by these things? And I don't know if we'd ever be able to identify or, find the victims of people like Hastert or whatever the case may be. It's not just about the Hastert case, but whatever type of political corruption case we're talking about, finding and identifying those particular victims, but finding and identifying people, for example, who have been victims of child sexual abuse and actually helping those people directly. Obviously this can take a billion different forms, and this is where I think it's open to as many ideas as we can possibly get. But for example, just as an example, if we could find a charity that was actually working with people who have been victims of this type of abuse, and we can actually form a fundraising campaign for a charity like that to actually make a difference in these people's lives, we're kind of, from the first level practical level of this, we are actually helping real people in the real world, which should be our priority. But secondarily, again, if people see that these crazy conspiracy internet bloggers are not just talking and talking and talking about this, but actually manifesting a movement that is having a real effect in the real world, and we can organize on certain key issues and actually help real people, again, I'm open to different ways of that can be done. But if we can actually do that and people see that, I think they will respond to that much more strongly than just listening to another report about how everything's corrupt and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. So that's just the general broad outline of my idea, and I'll throw it over to you, Sibel.
Well, no, that's a great idea. Let me ask you a couple of questions, then I will say what my response is to that and tell you what I had in mind, because you brought up excellent points. But you said, let's assume we find an organization, an NGO, okay? So you're looking at an NGO, organization that is not NGO.
Ah, okay.
That means you're already looking at some sort of an establishment, right? An entity that has, some funding, they have some psychologists, they have legal counsel, and blah, 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 who work with the system that we're already saying is not legit, okay? So what way can we help an organization like that? Usually people say, give us money, right? Because if we were to have $3 million, we're going to get treatments. Now, because this example, and I know it's a hypothetical example because we have been talking about Hastert, and you have other examples in mind, it doesn't have to be sexual abuse. That's what I did for 7 years, James. I worked as court-appointed special advocate. I investigated over 20 cases of sexual abuses, some severe ones, and I did it as an investigator by going and investigating the case, building the dossier for the judge, because this would be after the government would go remove the child, put them in the foster care. I had to go and keep up with the foster family, go to the psychologist that the child was assigned to, go to the biological parents, etc., and gather evidence of how this child was abused. And I picked the most difficult field, which was the sexual abuse. And I'm talking about severe cases. You know, I would wake up by a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning with a foster family saying they are just taking this 3.5-year-old girl to hospital because had this fever, etc. And they found out when they took her to the emergency room that she had gonorrhea and she had been raped. I mean, severely for extended period of time. I had a 5-year-old girl who was raped by her stepfather over months period. And that was filmed, by the way, and was sold. And at the time of this repeated rape, the girl was 3.5 years old. So repeatedly that the child could not have bowel movements because all her muscles had been torn, okay? So I worked with that system as a volunteer. I didn't accept any money, and I spent more than 60 hours a week. I went to court cases. I went through this DSS, Department of Social Services, and I tell you what, I realized, just as you get into this, how rotten the system was. You had many organizations, nonprofits that got money, lots of money, like court-appointed a special advocate, cause organization, tens of millions of dollars, okay? And what they wanted to show their funders, and these were the people who ran it, you know, originally CASA started by really wonderful people who had the best interest. They were idealists, okay, Peter? They were idealists. They were great people. But they retired, they died, and it became an organization, became a company. You don't pay tax, but you have a CEO that makes $300,000, and you have all these people. So all they wanted to show, the papers that they went and intervened in these cases, but they never show the result of what happened to those kids, because some of those kids were placed with foster families that were 100 times worse, okay? That ended up being sexually abused by the foster parents they were placed with. In some cases, I testified and I did this investigation in this case, and the judge said, well, he was going to place this child, the one that was severely raped for 2 years, 5-year-old girl, back with the mother's, biological mother's sister, because families got first option because they have priority than the, let's say, stranger foster care. Well, the mother and the stepfather, which was actually a boyfriend, had complete access to this child because they were there. They lived in the same quarter. So I would go to court and I'm sitting there and I'm seeing this guy who has been raping these kids, smirking, and the biological mother who was high, you know, with all sorts of drugs. And the solution, and they said the case was successfully closed. They removed the child. All this stuff got found out. After 2 years of shenanigan, the child was placed with an aunt who herself had 2 kids, were on all sorts of medication, with full access to the rapist, the mother's boyfriend. So what I'm trying to say is, I love the notion, but then it ends up boiling down to details like, yeah, I have it here in Bend, Oregon. There is this organization, same CEOs. Whoever started it, people who are like you, James, who are like Peter, with great objectives, sincere, you know, really wanted to help. But then those who turn these places to NGOs and organizations are no better, most of them, I'm not going to say all of them, than these government people that you say we should oppose because the whole system is corrupt, right? So then it boils down to, how do we help them? Either we have to become that organization, meaning with all the logistic that has to go with it, and the financial and everything, networks of attorneys. The people they talk about in this country about court-appointed attorneys, right? Do you know when you don't have money and you have court-appointed attorneys, usually you have nothing but shit? Excuse my language, you can put a blip in there. The guardian ad litem attorney assigned to this girl, out of 5 court hearings, she didn't show up for 3. I had to go and testify instead of her. I'm not an attorney because that was not a money case. But in the court paper, in the organization papers, everything looks great, James. The child was assigned a guardian ad litem attorney, foster care, and the psychologist, and blah, 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 and taking to the case. So that's for that. So, but I don't shoot down the idea. I think your idea to lead by example is absolutely perfect because much things that we say, we end up maybe being hypocrites. It's like, yeah, well, what are we doing? Why don't we show it by example? Same thing with our raising our kids. I know that most of the best things she's learning is not my lecture, but by watching me doing things, okay, or engaging in things. So I'm completely for that idea. And I would love to hear about the mechanism to achieve it, to overpass these parasitic entities who are making tons of money from children being raped. And they like to show these files to say, oh, these things were provided BS, okay? And for example, one good opportunity is this whole law about there is no statute of limitation on murder, but there is for raping children, minor. I don't think there should be. But then again, we go back to this whole notion of government or no government. That means we're going to be working within governmental channels. But
right. Okay.
I agree. I think it's a great idea. Now I present mine and
just before you do so, let me just say that I 100% agree with what you've said there, and thank you for sharing that. It's a horrific story, but I think gets straight to the heart of what the matter is here. And yes, you honed straight in on, I think, the problem with what I was saying there, and the reason that I said if we can find a charity, because obviously that's going to be the hardest part. And just a specific example of that, recently I covered a story on New World Next Week about the Congress not extending the 9/11 responders benefits and that sort of thing. And I had a comment from someone saying, well, if you're an anarchist, you shouldn't want Congress involved in it anyway. And that makes sense. Yes, you're right. I mean, I think if we have a war state and everything, I'd rather have that money being directed towards people like 9/11 first responders. But the point generally is taken. Yes, okay, so what then do we actually do about it? And so I was thinking, well, okay, how about if we actually have a fundraiser for a 9/11 first responder charity? But then the question becomes, who do you give the money to? And I've been putting the feeler out there to different people that I know saying, who do we trust? Is there any organization that's actually we can know is going to do a good job with this? And what I've gotten back is, yeah, you used to have good people like the Feel Good Foundation and others, and they were fine with people in the 9/11 Truth movement. But now it's like, oh, we don't want money from truthers. We don't want to be associated with those people. We don't want help from you. So yeah, you're exactly right. If this becomes a thing, what organization do we give our money to? That's completely not what I had in mind there. But then the other part of that is, well, then do we become that organization? And again, I do not want to become some sort of organization that we are now going to be some sort of structure and there's a leader and there's a board and all of that garbage nonsense. It can't be that. So yes, the devil is in the details, absolutely, with my plan, and I 100% concede that. Anyway, okay. On to your plan and your idea.
Yeah, but please don't close a chapter on it. Let's pursue it, because the earthquake happened in Turkey, okay? I knew if I were to raise money from the friends, myself, and give $5,000, 75 cents to Red Cross or etc., 75 cents out of $1 would go to the management, etc., 25% would go to the victims. But then once it went to Turkey, they had all this mafia, they called them tent mafias, who came and they stole half of those tents and resold those things and the medication. So what did I do? I ended up working my butt off. I raised some money. I put my own money. I got all this medical supply. I called few people in Turkey. This is 1999. They came pick me up from the airport. My father was alive back then. I had him help me recruit him and 4 other doctors, bunch of interns. I toured Turkish earthquake zone with people, corpses everywhere. They couldn't keep up with this stuff. We spent 1 week taking care of medical needs as much as we could, our group. So basically to say, to bypass those, but there are things we can do directly, okay? Or certain things in Vietnam to say, well, I can give it to this organization and 25% would go, but I'm going to go and I'm going to do this for this orphanage. But there are things. So please do not close that chapter because I think it's interesting. Here is my idea, and I have been thinking about this for the past year or so, but especially since I began this Hastert campaign. And that is currently the online media, so-called pseudo-alternatives, etc., is dominated by two categories, okay, of the media sources. One, you have the ones with resources, they have the money, tens of millions of dollars, pseudo-alternatives that are heavily funded by the foundations like Rockefeller and George Soros or Koch brothers, etc. Okay, so you have those. And then you have in the same category, you have these big ones that are directly funded by big mega corporation guys, whether it's Pierre Omidyar or those people who started Huffington Post. Now they set up this place called BuzzFeed, and they raise with the venture capitalists and everything hundreds of millions of dollars. Have you been following BuzzFeed, Peter? I mean, I have been watching them since their inception. It's an amazing thing with all these billionaires, okay? And everything is about their advertisement value, okay? So we can bombard people with this, consumerism related advertisement. So that's your value. So it's no different than mainstream media. The other category is thousands of people, maybe not thousands, hundreds of people, I don't know the number, like James Corbett, Peter B. Collins, Boiling Frogs Post, Guillermo Jimenez, Washington's blog. I mean, I have gotten Spiro. I have some really great people who have to work, take care of their life needs, etc., eating, supporting their families. So they are operating singular sites or singular information sources, and they're highly limited by lack of resources, money, IT department. There are things, and then providing how much information one person can provide, right? In one place. So you should also look at it from the viewer's perspective. How do you expect people to find out about dozens of incredible ones among thousands, dependent, reliable, real alternative, real independent, real nonpartisan, okay, non-establishment sources? That's hard. And even if they go and find 10, 15, it is difficult to go and keep up with 15, 20 different websites. That's what I was trying to do when I was doing my aggregated news, driven mostly from the alternative sources. I mean, it cost me 3-4 hours a day. Go this one, look at these, read the content, the next one. So, and what we are doing, it has severe limitation. And we are fighting these big giants. So what I want to do is, and I want to at least try to do, together with the people we already know they have established track records of being independent, not being agenda driven by partisanship. They are not in the pockets of the corporate mega corporations. Whatever many dozens of us we have, 2 dozens or 15 people, 10 people, together put this model that would be, in terms of resources, able to compete and actually reach people and compete against these vultures, mega corporations, mega foundation vultures, the agenda driven, the system's own, agents doing this stuff. And it's like, what do you need? You really need a good IT system. There are so many things we are limited with at Boiling Frogs Post. I could never afford IT department for a site like that, even if there were 4 of us together. But to have the needed resources, IT department, really good, solid, experienced editors, news editors, investigative journalists, full-time investigative journalists. Sure, you don't start with 500 or 50, you start with 5 full-time investigative journalists, managing editors, senior editors, IT department, and the podcast producers daily, the video shows, mini documentaries. And that means taking care of the travel expenses, the equipment, the time, and all the resources that are all mini documentaries. And have this and good select news, like what the significant news, the ones that are being completely blacked out by the mainstream media, you're looking at a multi-million-dollar organization entity. And I believe we are going to reach people that they don't even know about the availability of this information, or people that once they are exposed to, they would say, glad I found this reports that is being produced by James Corbett, or this great podcast series that was put by Peter B. Collins, or this particular story on Hastert. With all of us resources put together, we reached what? James, Peter, we reached maximum 50,000 people. Maximum 50,000 people. But with an organization like that, we can reach millions of people, because we can. Because I don't have any expertise of today's stuff. How do you spread these things so it gets to people? Social media director expertise. And I've never used Instagram in my life. And there's so much I can do, try to find volunteers. So what I want to do, and for us as a consortium to do, with public funding, free to all, okay? Solely public funded, no advertisement, no foundations, no corporations, no political agenda, but funded by millions of dollars solely by people, okay? And then go after those guys, because then we put something like what we did with Hastert's case. Peter, believe me or not, even these shameless, spineless people could not ignore it when they know that millions of people have seen it. Do you think they don't know that we reached 37,400 people? Sure they do. They can shrug it off like they did with whistleblower cases, real whistleblower cases, with Ross Dice's case. They've been doing that for a long, long time. But do you think they're going to be able to really not only ignore, we're going to put them out of business? So that's the model I have in mind, that I'm thinking I would like to put the program together, consortium together, everything, including going and finding the most capable editors, okay, news editors, but with integrity records. I don't want the guy who worked for 25 years for New York Times, because even if he started as a great guy, after 25 years there, something happens. It's like a disease. It's like bubonic plague. You catch it, okay? I think you can rehabilitate only to a certain degree, but it's still people like Bill Conroy. Bill Conroy has been doing this for 35 years. He's a person with, I'm talking as an investigative journalist, but to have the journalists, to have the editors, to have our consortium, that in one place people come and visit and they get to see Corbett's work, they see Peter's work, they see our podcast series, they have investigative reports 3-4 times a week, significant news of the days, discussion forum, activism forum. For example, what you just brought up, James, with let's say we want to take on sexually abused children, to start the campaign there. But again, these forums, you do need some IT capabilities. You do need committed moderators, because you know what happens. This spam people come and put porno pictures in there, or you have people coming and putting awful languages in there. I want to say, I don't want to have Boiling Frogs Post expanded a little bit, do this. No, I want to know if we can test, and we may fail. If we fail with crowdfunding, everybody gets every single penny they have put in this 100% back, because it's a third party, the Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever it is. We'll see which one is the best one, and then we'll invite people, and we have that 2 or 3 months, and we present them with, these are the people, these are the things we are going to provide, these are the editors. We are going to be not the little tiny little mouse. This is going to be the bulldog alternative media. Currently, it doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. And we have the people already. We have a pretty good base. And with that kind of funding, whether establishing a IT department here with 3-4 web administrators, IT experts, the content managers, I'm talking about, if we're going to do it, the way I see it is to do it with a project that's going to be at least $2.5 million, solely funded by people. We don't reach it, maybe we'll try it again 1 year later. Or maybe we say people are not interested, whatever, I don't know. But if we don't, people get their money back. So it's not like, oh yeah, there are some people who want to, no. Everybody gets their money back. It's committed for 2-3 months. If we make that big amount, and we can tackle this head on, we'll do it. And I want a lot of people who want to produce great stuff, but they can't. They are working. They are supporting families, so they can maybe do one podcast, maybe every 2 weeks. And I know some good investigative reporters. I know some good whistleblowers stories that need a forum to put out there. But I need reporters who go and travel and do the digging. I don't have that travel resources for travel to go to DC and do that and come back and do the fact checking. So that's my idea. And the reason I kept calling preposterous, because coming, from Boiling Frogs Post, BFB reports about this little whistleblower, or even 6-7 of us, it's like, you guys really believe you can go out there and raise millions and have the system required, the resources required, and then go and say, now we're going to challenge, because I believe we can. I really believe we can. And I believe within that, we can have our own activism things, whether it is setting up examples, because when you said organization, that can be an umbrella, and then say, okay, 100% of the money goes to the victims. It's not like somebody's going to take 75 cents of it, cut it, and then say 25 cents goes. And if it's going to be some travel thing required, we can take care of it. And preposterous, maybe to some people. Crazy, I don't think so. Am I hopeful enough that it can be done if we can get enough people? And once it's done, it can show that it can be tremendously successful. That I'm confident. I'm 100% confident.
All right, let me respond to that before we throw it over to Peter to be the judge of what we will do for the rest of our lives. My response, okay, so the way I'm framing this is creating the New York Times of the alt media, and I don't mean that in the negative sense that we could take that. I mean that in the sense that people think of the New York Times as the paper of record. So creating the place to go for alt media, with in terms of quality, the quality of the work that would be able to be performed. Given the funding, we could do, the in-depth kind of documentary reports and travel and having editorial and team and all of that. We could have the proper setup to do this in an exceptionally good way. And it will also be, since it is the place to go for quality alternative media journalism, everyone will go there. It'll be huge. It will be more effective in getting these ideas out there and changing the kind of the mainstream narrative and all of that. And for the first part, I think completely laudable. That is obviously something that is needed, is sorely needed, is to have the ability to do this, to fund. I mean, it is a huge thing to fund a properly done news organization that can collect news and editorialize properly and do all of this and collect it all and have it there for people. It's extremely important. On the other aspect of it, the popularity side of it, I do not know if that audience is there for that. And I say that because when you look at something like a BuzzFeed, that is not the comparison for this.
God,
BuzzFeed,
sure.
Gawker, those sites are not the comparison. Top headlines on BuzzFeed, here's what waffle cupcakes look like, and they are just heavenly. There's a Canadian breath spray for sale on Amazon, and the reviews are hilariously awful. BuzzFeed is not the comparison. So if we're looking in the comparison in the alt media sphere of what we're doing, you can look at, I don't know, a ProPublica, an anti-war, Global Research, InfoWars. The absolute pinnacle, you're never going to, I think, get bigger than what InfoWars is right now. It's the 2,000th largest website on the internet. That's very, very, very high traffic, extremely large. And I mean, let's face it, no matter what you think about InfoWars and Alex Jones and all of that, there is a reason why it is by far and away the largest in the alt media sphere. And I quote,
"You really think you're on a winning team? You really think the devil is going to deliver to you and your family in the end?"
End quote. Which is, I mean, I think we know why that resonates with large numbers of people. It's vastly entertaining. And hopefully some actual nuggets get slipped in there as well that get people started on the right path. And hey, I mean, I'll admit Alex Jones was a huge influence on me years ago and actually was the impetus for me starting the website. So there is good that comes out of that, but that's clearly not what we're going for. So then the question is, well, can we at all harness anything approaching that size of an audience, or even doing something like that? So that's one thing. That's sort of the technical side of this. But then there's my other response to this, which is from my own experience. I bristle at the word consortium. I bristle at the idea that I have worked my ass off for years to get the independence that I have now, that I literally am beholden to no one. I am here because I have the subscribers who are supporting me. I could not thank them enough for that. But it is the Corbett Report is my site, and I say anything I want, or don't say anything I don't want. I don't answer to anyone else. There's not anyone that I'm working with who will bristle at anything or maybe there are people who bristle what I say. Doesn't matter. I will say what I'm going to say anyway. And this is, I guarantee you at some point this becomes a major problem in a website like that. And as an example, let's bring up some examples right now, put some cards on the table. I'm an anarchist, which obviously there are different people who are going to be very much against that idea. But I'm one of these heathens, anti-science, global warming deniers. I'm pro-life. All of these ideas that will make Peter's head explode, I'm sure, in apoplectic rage. And good. I'm not here to get into those debates, but I'm saying those are things that will really matter. I've had episodes of my podcast about Planned Parenthood Exposed and other things that, again, not only, Peter and other people would have huge problems with that, but their audiences would have huge problems with that. So now, if I'm on this consortium website, and Peter's also on this consortium website, and our respective audiences are all going to this consortium website, and his audience sees what I'm talking about, and my audience sees what he's talking about, and suddenly I'm answering for what he's saying. Nightmare. I absolutely bristle at that. And I do not want to see that happen.
I say three things because I answered three questions because there were three, right? There were three different. The first, I start with the last one. This is fresh. Who says people have to give up what they are doing? Because they can continue their website. Peter can do what he's doing. You do what you're doing. But those at work, instead of requiring a lot of people who do not visit those sites simply for the reason they don't want to go to 20 sites, they can see because you're pro open source. So currently, anybody can put your YouTube, okay? And I can go and say, this is the work from James Corbett, and I will put it there. And more people get exposed to it. So it's not that people are giving up and they're coming under one umbrella, they're answering to anyone. I don't answer to anyone either, and I don't want to ever answer to anyone. And in fact, the beauty of Boiling Frogs post, okay, Peter B. Collins has been with me. We have been together since 2004, 2002, my whistleblowing. And we've been working together for 7 years. Have I ever told you, Peter, I don't like this topic or guest, or can you cut this part out and can you cut that part out?
Never.
Everybody has 100% editorial freedom. And that's exactly going to be the case who are working full-time. Those are investigative news reporters for the organization that I am working on right now. But the videos that are made, some of them are made like the videos you made for Boiling Frogs Post. I had zero input in your videos. And it's the same thing. So you didn't have to. So consortium does not translate to answering to anyone. That's number one. Number two is the fact that they have 5 million people. I just talked about moral decay, guys. I don't want those people anyway. And I believe a smaller irate minority people, let's say the 30 out of 50,000, 40,000, 100,000, the people that support you, for me, it's far more important than having 3 million of people who are going to expect to see vagina pictures and penis pictures. I don't want those crowds. They're gonna pollute my site. I can't prevent them from coming and visiting this website if we have it, when we have it. But I am not going to say, oh, if we were to bring some entertainment and promote this, this thing, they put silicons in their butts now, and that's like currently surpassing breast augmentation. I found out about it a few months ago. There are people like that, and they would never come. I don't want them on our place. So I don't care, millions. But is it possible, and is it true that there are hundreds of thousands of people who do like what you're producing, or who would like it, but they have never been exposed to it? I've never heard of this person. Oh my goodness, I love it. Oh, thank God I found BFB. Well, this is going too slowly. To bring and showcase all these places is a great thing. The other thing you brought is differences of That's what makes Boiling Frogs Post to my liking and to many people liking. Some people who are going to get offended, they can get out. I don't care. First of all, it's not paid. So it's free. So nobody can have it. Oh, well, I'm not going to pay you anymore. Pff, fine. Don't. Next crowdfunding time, you don't pay me anything. You don't pay the organization anything. But there are people who appreciate the fact to say, my goodness, nothing has sanctity on the side. They go after libertarians. They go after Democrats. They go after Republicans. I mean, there's someone in the past was my friend. I did criticism of Dan Ellsberg. I don't put anything out saying, oh, but we don't cover global warming anyway. That's not our cozy thing. But no, that won't happen. So for all three, I would say I'm absolutely with you, James, but there is no way I would want to have for us and this, that kind of a site. And by consortium, nobody answers to anything. In fact, you submit, you know, and you get just the way it has been working with BFB. And that's a great track record to have. 7 years since I started it, and I have never told a single person to change their word or tone or topic or guest. In fact, I have had some guests in some people's podcast productions submitted to us that I would like, but you know what? It's not for me. Some people are going to like it. Some people are going to find value for it. And I want them, that is what it means by nonpartisan. There may be a libertarian view. There may be a liberal view. There may be an anarchist view, more than one, more than five. And how could you evaluate and really engage in critical thinking if you are not exposed to all of them? Great. I want people to be exposed to all of them. And people who have problem with it, don't come. There's nobody forcing anyone to come there. Don't donate. Nobody's forcing anyone to donate. Run us out of business. Maybe we'll never be able to raise it. Maybe we'll raise it. Maybe we'll be in operation for 1 year. But it hasn't been tried. As you said, BuzzFeed, ProPublica, blah, blah, all of those, Politico, etc. Those are Washington Post transfer people. You got establishment going to another establishment. But this is, nothing like this has been tried. And this is something that I believe we can try and we can give it a chance. It has a big chance that it can be more successful than all of us collectively have been able to do. Meaning you separately, and which is very successful, James, BFB separately, Peter B separately, and a dozen of other people separately, bring them together and this will dwarf that because it will also be viewer friendly. It won't force people to go here, 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 here. I'm dizzy. I can't keep up with all the stuff. And to be able to organize it, format it, and give it to people and have the activism forum. And Peter, I'm going to shut up.
Well, there's a lot here. And let me reduce it to 2 points here, one kind of aimed at each of you. And that is that I haven't heard from a listener who invited me to check out James's work on a specific topic since yesterday. And I routinely hear from people, and I'll just give you an example. I recently interviewed Stuart Wexler, who's written a book about white extremists in the U.S., and it included chapters on the King assassination and on the Oklahoma City bombing. And I interviewed him, and I let him offer his point of view. I didn't try to introduce a competing narrative, and several of my listeners criticized me for it, and I accept their criticism. And one of them said, he sent me a link to a James Corbett podcast. I think it's an interview with William Pepper, or it's based on his work. I'm not sure. I haven't clicked the link yet. But I welcome that. And I can learn from James's work. I don't necessarily have to adopt his view about abortion rights or about climate change to learn from the very high-level, competent work that he does. And so, likewise, I am comfortable being included in Boiling Frogs Post, where we have a range of points of view that get expressed and delivered. And we rely on the intelligence of our readers / listeners / viewers to make up their own minds. And that, to me, is the rich tradition of real journalism, not the kind of journalism product that is what is often passed off in the U.S. today. And to you, Sibel, as many people know, I produce a separate podcast series for Boiling Frogs Post called Processing Distortion. And when I will include an excerpt from a Processing Distortion interview in one of my own podcasts, I will get 3 or 4 emails saying, why can't I use my subscription to peterbcollins.com at boilingfrogspost.com? And I always tell them that we tried. Sibel, you and I and Matthew, your husband, talked about this several times, and we have been unable to merge our subscriber systems in a way to make that work, but we're open to it. And I think that both of these examples show that we have some shared listeners and some people who are exclusive to each of our respective streams. But if we collaborate at the distribution level and give people access to the variety of our work at one location, which doesn't mean that there isn't still a Corbett Report, there isn't still a peterbcollins.com,
That's right.
but we unify it and collect it in one place where people can easily find it with either a single subscription or a contribution, however the model is set up. I think that that is in the best interests of our audiences. And on that basis, I'm very willing to explore it and to look for a plan that would protect the independence that James values so much, and I deeply respect that, James, while we honor the interests of our audiences and look for ways to build density without having a top-down structure that says, Peter, you're going to talk about the NSA this week, and you got to toe this line. I never expect that to happen.
Exactly.
And also, I wouldn't object to fact checkers or people who work on the editorial side, because I'm a one-man shop. I've got Chloe here, but she just keeps me company. And so, I do see the potential that we could grow into a network that doesn't become a corporate type entity with all of the drawbacks that we've been discussing here today, but that does have the benefits of serving our audiences, sharing those audiences, and then expanding them overall.
No, absolutely. Well said. And I'm glad to hear that. But that's exactly what I have in mind. And that is, in fact, it will make it even more valuable, because that's what I meant by consortium, meaning everybody has their own things. They do things, but everybody's work gets to be showcased in certain front page section of that. So if Peter B had one particular show on pbc.com, and if it's open to public, I'll make sure that's showcased there. And we also have the arrangement we have had, meaning there are, work that there will be work that Peter will do original for the site. But again, no editorial interference with people, no management or micromanagement, because I hate that kind of a thing. I don't want it to be done to me, and I don't like to do it to other people. And because of that, we have been in this consortium with Boiling Frogs Post, because nobody has to manage anybody. Everybody works independently. And those chunks come together there. And they don't have to do anything really extra unless they want to produce some original work for let's say, this website in addition to the news. But the resources for travel, and actually I'm thinking, Peter, we're going to have a studio space and have in multi-locations, one in the East Coast, one in San Francisco, one in Portland, that we rent out for certain things. So I'm putting all the stuff together, and I'm thinking, yeah, there are some documentary related things that, let's say, James can draw from and go to China or come to Canada or come to US and interview. There's a difference, as James knows this. I don't, by doing it on camera. So his air, his hotel, and that work is free to all, meaning everybody watches it. James also puts it on his website. We put it on our website. James is James. Everybody, stays their own entity. Like a professor I had was saying oil and vinegar or whatever, or mixtures. This is like salad bowl. Every single chunks are beautifully displaced. We don't want to blend and make salsa out of it. We want to have these chunky pieces. That's the beauty of it and the variation of opinions. And I really want to hear back from our audience, from our viewers, and say, yeah, how supportive would they be? I don't know if it can satisfy some people who are looking for penis or vagina that I just mentioned, or some celebrity. None of those things. It's degrading for the kinds of things we are doing. I'm not interested. And if I'm not interested, I'm not going to present it to other people. They're going to be those people who are going to come and say, oh, you know how many more people, Sibel, you bring into the site if you were to do this or that, and maybe have a dating site as parallel to that. You know, people can have online sex, etc. None of those stuff. But I believe the time has come. We have tried a bunch of things and we have been successful. I'm not saying we haven't been successful. It's going too slowly. It's good. And this Hastert case truly became a proof. And I'm saying, oh, you know what? Not 30,000. I want us in the next year this time, okay, in 1.5 year max, to be able to reach 500,000. Just like this, by publishing it and having people who know how to use the social media effectively. I don't have any expertise. Instagram, I don't know what it is. Some picture gets clipped, I don't know. But we need to have those resources, and some people would love it, some people hate it. If everybody loved us, if we had millions of people, we are doing something wrong. But there are hundreds of thousands of people who are going to appreciate the differences of opinions presented and what we're going to give them.
All right, now let's put it in the court of our listeners, viewers, and readers.
Exactly. I think, yeah, ultimately, again, we can talk about this all day, but it's going to be up to everyone out there as to what they'll support. So, yes, I am going to continue producing my pretty much daily reports at corbettreport.com, and if they get aggregated on a site like that, more's the better. I mean, I have no problem with that. All right. Peter, I'll take it the fact that you didn't even address my idea as a fact that this is a losing idea. So we will now just talk about the alt media site.
In fact, give me 30 seconds. James, I believe that any way that we can find to directly support the victims of the oppression and corruption that we report on can not only be good for those individuals, but also help highlight the problem and the lack of response or addressing it from institutions. And I believe much more in direct action. I will never give a dime to the Red Cross. After the San Francisco earthquake in 1989, they came through here and raised $100 million, and then they didn't spend it in the Bay Area. They had to be shamed into spending half of it. And so I understand what you're describing. And if I could help one of the victims of Dennis Hastert's illegal behavior, I would be open to doing that. Finding the right mechanism and with a delivery system that doesn't involve all of the existing voracious and carnivorous charities, I would be very open to it. And I do practice that myself. I'm not going to tell a lot of stories here, but I help people one-to-one when I can. And I don't look for publicity, and I don't look for any other reward than the real satisfaction of knowing that I was able to use some of my limited resources to help somebody who had less. And that is a model that I will always respond to.
Yes.
Same
and
here.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that all of us do things like that in our personal lives that we don't like to publicize because we're not that type of people. But I think the point is to create a phenomenon, an example that will allow others to participate in it. So anyway, all right, lots of stuff on the table for today. And as you say, this is going into the court of public opinion, or our public at any rate, and ultimately your responses, the way that you interact with these ideas is going to influence the way this proceeds and what we end up doing. So your feedback is not just encouraged, it is demanded. You must leave your feedback on this and where you think this is going to go from here and how it can best proceed. And we're going to have to sort through this and find our way through towards this. I don't believe there's any kind of time frame as of yet of this idea, Sibel, that you have?
I'm thinking I'm putting the components And I want us to begin the crowdfunding if we have positive response no later than February, March.
All right. Well, there you
Okay,
go. There's a target. So again, yeah, please give us your feedback and let us know how, when, if you're willing to participate in either of these ideas. All right. So much to discuss, but we've already been gabbing away for hours here. Let's wrap things up. Once again, Sibel Edmonds is at boilingfrogspost.com, Peter B. Collins is at peterbcollins.com, and yours truly, James Corbett, is at corbettreport.com. Until next time, thank you for listening, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
This video is brought to you by the subscribers of boilingfrogspost.com. For more information on this and other topics,